The plane had barely finished boarding when the trouble began. Passengers were still settling in, placing carry-ons in overhead bins and adjusting their seatbelts, when a uniformed flight attendant, her expression tight and forced, stopped at seat 2A in first class. Sitting there was a tall, well-dressed black man, mid-40s, with a calm yet commanding presence. He had just pulled out his tablet, planning to go over the final figures of a $120 million partnership deal before the plane took off. But the attendant didn't smile. She didn't offer him a drink. Instead, she leaned in with a practiced tone that dripped with forced courtesy and said, "Sir, I believe there's been a seating error." He blinked once, slowly, then looked down at his boarding pass, clear as day, seat 2A, first class. "This is my seat," he said, his voice steady, not raising it, not yet. He didn't need to. The eyes of nearby passengers had already turned. Few glanced away quickly. Others kept watching. The attendant forced a smile. "Yes, but unfortunately, we have a situation with another passenger, and we'll need you to move back to business class. We appreciate your cooperation." His eyes met hers, firm, unblinking. "Is this because of the man who just walked in?" he asked, tilting his head toward the front of the cabin. A white man in a blazer and khakis had just stepped on board, speaking loudly to someone on his phone. He looked annoyed, clearly used to getting his way. The flight attendant hesitated. "Sir, I don't want to make a scene," he cut her off, still calm. "You already are," the murmurs started. A woman nearby lowered her magazine. A man across the aisle raised his eyebrows. Phones weren't recording yet, but the tension was growing thick. The white passenger had now made his way up the aisle, glanced at the black man in his seat, and without hesitation said, "There's been a mistake. This is my seat." The CEO, because that's what he was, looked at the man, then back at the flight attendant. "Let me be clear," he said, now folding his tablet neatly. "I bought this ticket with my own money, and I'm not moving, just to make another man more comfortable." The white man huffed. "You people always think—" But before he could finish, the CEO raised a hand, silencing the cabin. No yelling, no dramatics, just quiet power. "Be careful," he said, "because you have no idea who I am or what's about to happen." The flight attendant looked nervous now. She stepped away to call a supervisor. Minutes passed. A second, airline staff member arrived and asked the CEO to quietly follow them to the back. They said they'd sort it out. He stood up, dusted his suit as if brushing off the moment, and said, "Make sure you remember my name. You'll be needing it real soon." He was escorted out of first class and back to row 7, business class. People watched in awkward silence. The white man took the seat without shame, even ordering a drink before the plane took off. The rest of the flight went on like nothing had happened. But something had. Something big. And not one of them had any idea who they had just insulted, or what he had the power to do. Meanwhile, in the very same flight, near the back of the plane, sat a young black teenager. No one noticed him when he first boarded. Quiet, hoodie on, carrying a worn-out backpack with school books sticking out. He looked barely 17, headphones in, eyes glued to the window. Life hadn't given him much, but he had a good heart. Always did. And when a heavily pregnant white woman boarded late, scanning the cabin with tired eyes and clutching her belly, he didn't hesitate. Her seat was in the middle, deep in economy, but the teen could see how exhausted she was. So, without being asked, he stood up, walked over, and offered her his seat by the aisle. She looked shocked, unsure at first, but then her eyes welled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, lowering herself carefully. He nodded and sat 2 rows back in a cramped middle seat. He didn't do it for praise, didn't even think much of it. Just felt like the right thing to do. But hours later, after the plane landed and everyone began to leave, she tapped his shoulder and handed him a small folded note. "Please read this when you're alone," she said. Then she walked off, leaving him standing there, note in hand, too stunned to speak. Back in the boardroom on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, the CEO's assistant was on the phone. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed the airline's number. She had just received an urgent call. Her boss had walked straight off the plane and asked for a full freeze of a pending $120 million investment deal with that airline's parent company. The freeze would crush their quarterly numbers. Stocks would shake. Headlines would follow. No one had known who he was. No one had thought to ask. And now the world was about to find out. But while that corporate storm began to brew at the top, something equally life-changing was unfolding quietly at the bottom. Inside, a small handwritten note that would soon turn one teenager's entire life upside down. The note was still unopened. And what it said would change everything. Want me to continue the next part of the story? The note stayed in his pocket the entire train ride home. The teen sat near the back, head pressed against the window, his fingers brushing the edges of the folded paper again and again. He didn't open it. Not yet. Part of him didn't know why. Maybe because something about it felt different. It wasn't just a thank you, he could tell. The woman's eyes had said more than her words ever could. The train clattered on through the city, lights flickering past the windows like flashes of a life he hadn't yet lived. When he finally reached his stop, the sky was already dark and the wind had picked up. He pulled his hoodie tighter around his ears and started walking, sneakers crunching against the broken pavement. Home wasn't much. A tiny apartment on the third floor of a run-down building. Cracked walls, flickering kitchen light, the kind of place where dreams had to fight just to stay alive. His mom was already asleep on the couch, a folded towel under her head, and the TV still on low volume. She had 2 jobs, sometimes 3 when the bills piled up, and most nights she didn't even make it to her room. He placed a blanket over her and walked quietly to the kitchen, sat down at the small table, and finally pulled the note from his pocket. His hands hesitated for a second, then carefully unfolded the paper. Inside was a short message, handwritten, neat, but shaky, like she had written it in a rush. Your kindness didn't go unnoticed. Please email me. This is not a joke. You reminded me of someone I lost long ago. I want to help you if I can. E.M. At the bottom was an email address. No name beyond the initials. No details. Just that. He stared at the note for a long time. The room silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. Something about those words echoed inside him. It was strange. Unbelievable even. He wondered if it was real, or just a moment someone would forget after a good night's sleep. But the next day, something happened that made him realize it wasn't going away. At school, during lunch, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He didn't tell anyone. Not his friends. Not even his favorite teacher who always checked in on him. This felt private, special. But by the time he got home that evening, the curiosity had eaten away at his doubts. He opened the old family laptop and typed the email slowly. Just a few lines. Hi. I'm the teen who gave up my seat. Thank you for the note. I wasn't sure if I should write, but I'm here. He hit send and immediately regretted it. What if it was a scam? What if it was a mistake? But it wasn't. 3 hours later, he got a reply. The message was short, but enough to stop his breath. I'm glad you wrote. I meant what I said. We should talk. Do you have time tomorrow afternoon for a video call? E.M. He stared at the screen for several seconds. The room seemed to shrink around him. Back in Manhattan, the CEO sat in his office, phone pressed to his ear. His assistant had just finished giving him the latest update. The airline executives had panicked once the news reached them. The freeze on the $120 million deal sent ripples through their financial team. They begged for a conversation. Apologies were flying. But it wasn't about apologies anymore. It was about principle. No one on that plane had cared who he was. They had judged him based on nothing but appearance. No questions, no hesitation. He had been treated like he didn't belong. But he did belong, more than any of them knew. The company he ran was one of the biggest tech firms in the country. The airline had been depending on his support for their next innovation phase, a new fleet of AI-enhanced aircraft tracking systems. Without that funding, they'd fall behind in the race. He had the power to delay that, or kill it completely. He didn't enjoy using power like that. Not often. But this time, it was personal. Still, even in the middle of all that chaos, he kept thinking about something else, something small, but it kept replaying in his head. That boy. The one who gave up his seat without a second thought. He had watched it happen. From business class, he saw the gesture. Quiet, genuine, no cameras, no performance. Just a young man doing what was right. It stayed with him, because in that moment, when he himself had been disrespected and moved out of a seat he had paid for, he had also seen something else, a reminder of what leadership should look like. And he had no idea yet, but that same boy was about to walk into something much bigger than either of them expected. The next afternoon, the teen sat in the kitchen again, nervously waiting for the video call. His laptop balanced on a stack of books to get the angle right. His hands were sweaty. He had combed his hair, changed his shirt twice, and cleaned the background like it mattered. The call rang. He answered, and when the screen loaded, there she was, the same woman from the plane. Her face softer now, no longer strained by the discomfort of pregnancy. But her eyes, the same kind ones, were full of something else this time. Determination. "I'm glad you came," she said. He nodded slowly. "Thanks for reaching out." She smiled. "You probably have a lot of questions." He didn't speak, just nodded again. "Well," she said, adjusting her seat, "my name is Elizabeth Monroe. You wouldn't know this, but my family owns a charitable foundation. We work with young people who show promise, potential. But it's more than just good grades or sports. We look for character." He stayed quiet, listening. "And what you did that day, that small act of kindness, and reminded me of someone very dear to me, my son. I lost him 5 years ago. He was your age. He would have done exactly what you did." He blinked hard, unsure what to say. "I'm not just here to say thank you," she continued. "I'm here because I want to help you. There's a program we're starting, funding young students, mentoring them, opening doors that are usually closed. I want you to be the first." He finally found his voice. "Why me?" "Because," she said gently, "you didn't know anyone was watching, and that's what made it real." Outside, the city kept moving. Horns honking, people rushing, life unfolding. But inside that tiny kitchen, a door had quietly opened, and neither of them knew it yet. But this small connection was about to collide with a much larger storm. Storm that had already started brewing in boardrooms and newsrooms across the country, where executives were scrambling, and reporters were asking the question, who is the man that pulled a $120 million deal in one phone call? And soon, those two stories, so different on the surface, were going to crash into each other in a way no one could have predicted. Not the teen, not Elizabeth, not even the CEO. And when they did, the world would be watching. The days that followed were anything but normal. The teen, whose name was Jordan, started hearing from people he hadn't spoken to in months. Old classmates, teachers, even neighbors he didn't know watched the local news, started noticing something was different. Something big, but no one knew the whole story. Not yet. Elizabeth kept in touch. She didn't just promise opportunity, she delivered it. First, it was a scholarship application, already filled out and waiting. Then came a mentorship program she created just for him, pairing him with people in law, tech, and even nonprofit work. She was serious, but Jordan didn't brag about it. He stayed quiet, careful, grounded. He still rode the same bus, still looked after his mom, still studied in the kitchen. But now, there was something behind his eyes. Purpose. What he didn't know was that his story had already begun spreading. One of Elizabeth's board members, a journalist turned philanthropist, had quietly passed Jordan's story to a friend. The media. They hadn't used his full name, just a young black student who gave his seat to a pregnant woman, unaware she would later offer him a life-changing opportunity. That line caught fire online. And somewhere in that same thread, users began talking about another story, one with a very different tone. The story of a black CEO removed from first class to accommodate a white passenger. The two stories weren't linked,